Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at this Hornby Class 56 that has been sent to me by Jack. Now Jack tells me he's bought this off eBay. It was sold to him as a running loco, but he received it and it's not running. So we're going to have a quick look at it. It's upside down in the box there, so let's slide it out of the box and have a look at what we're dealing with. This is a BR Blue version of the 56, renumbered as Oystermouth 56040. It becomes immediately apparent that the couplings have come adrift in the box, as has one of the sand boxes, and the bogie frames on this end of the model are actually on back to front. So we've got it out of the box and I'm just getting all these bits and pieces together. So there's the base for the KD couplers that's come adrift. There's the sand box, and the KD coupler on that end is actually completely disintegrated, so we're going to have to replace that. Hopefully we've got enough bits to make two good couplings. So with these bogie frames being on the wrong way round, that's actually preventing the bogie from turning at all. That's locked solid. The other one, however, is turning okay. So it looks like the buffer beam cowlings are also missing off this model, but that's not uncommon for this model. Doing a battery test on the wheels, there is very little movement. There's no lights or anything working. Jack did say that this was a DCC fitted model, so it may be the fact that the decoder is not suitable for DC running. So I'm going to put the model in the loco cradle now. I'll flip it upside down and have a look at what's going on. The first thing I'm going to do is, using my long nose pliers, I'm going to gently prise these bogie frames off. These are only held on by two spigots and they are friction fit. Once these are removed, they allow the bogie to be pivoted as normal, so having them on backwards was actually stopping that bogie from moving. I'm going to take the other ones off as well, just for ease of access to the body securing screws, and then we'll have a look at what's going on the inside of the model. Removing the bogie frames allows access to these body securing screws. There are 4 of them, 2 in each corner like this, and they are flat bladed. You have to go gentle because sometimes if they've been over tightened you will end up snapping the plastic lugs. So opening the model up, you can see, as Jack stated, it is DCC fitted. It looks to be in relatively clean condition, but I'm just going to remove the decoder and put a blanking plate in to test it on DC to see if we've got a complete non-runner or just a non-runner on digital. So I've got a spare blanking plate there. I'm just going to put that in. And now we'll give it another battery test. Now, giving it a battery test this time, you can see the wheels are trying to turn around, although it's not a very good runner. There are some pickup issues from them wheels, but at least we know that it's not completely dead, and it was just the fact that the DCC decoder didn't support DC running. The nicely weathered body shell is going to be set aside. It is missing the multiple working connectors on each side, and that front glazing's also loose on that end, so we'll have to rectify that later on. So it's back into the loco cradle, and I'm now going to remove these keeper plates from the bogies and get access to the wheels, gear train and the pickups. These, I'd imagine, are all going to need a thorough clean, looking at the amount of black dirt that's on the wheel backs of this model. These keeper plates are not the easiest things to remove. They are quite fragile and you have to work steady to remove the small clips, otherwise you can split them and break them. I'm using a blunt scalpel blade here just to lever these off, and once one or two have come off, the whole thing just pops off readily. But it's getting those initial ones off without breaking them that's the trick. As you can see, removing them reveals the drivetrain, and unfortunately no proper bearings. These wheels just sit in the plastic of the bogie frame. So removing the wheels from the model, it becomes apparent that some of the pickups are actually bent flat. They're not making contact with any of the wheels, which could give an explanation as to why it's not running too well. And they are covered in dirt and grease, so we're going to have to give this a thorough cleaning with a cotton bud of methylated spirits. And once I've cleaned the pickups, I will clean all the wheel backs and the wheel treads. I'm also going to bend those pickups back out and see if we can make them have better contact with the wheels. So just running the cotton bud around the wheel rim you can see it's removing quite a lot of dirt off the model. And the wheel backs were really dirty. This is where the pickups try and collect electricity, and that cotton bud is actually black there. So this is going to take some cleaning. So I work on one wheel at a time, and that there now is been properly cleaned. So I'm going to work on one wheel at a time, as I say. And you have to put these wheels back in the correct way. The cog is offset on the axle. It has to go in one way. If you put it in backwards like I'm doing here, it won't make connection with the drivetrain, and it will just freewheel, and you'll lose traction. This applies to Hornby's Class 50, 60 and 31 models as well. So now that I've cleaned that, the pickups are now bent back out as to where they should be, so they're pressing correctly on the wheel backs. I'm just going to use a cotton bud and mess to clean out that axle hole and remove any of the horrible old congealed grease out of those cogs. I'm also going to use a cocktail stick here just to scrape off some of the old dirt that's built up on this model. I mean, look at that. That is just, it's like earwax almost. It's very, very nasty stuff. And it all needs to be removed, as this will put strain on the drivetrain and eventually could end up weakening and burning out the motor. So I'm going to give it all a thorough clean there. You can see just how much muck's coming off this on those cotton buds. And now I'm putting the wheel back in. This wheel and the pickups have all been thoroughly cleaned. So I'm just going to use the cocktail stick there just to gently make sure the pickups are behind the wheels where they should be. And now giving it a test with the battery, you can see that it is picking up power and running as it should be. So now I'm going to continue the cleaning on the other wheels and axles. And now they've all been done, they're all nice and shiny. I'm going to just clean all that old congealed grease off the bottom of this keeper plate. Otherwise that will work its way back into the drivetrain. The gear train has got some fresh silicone grease and some oil lubrication all on it to make sure that it is properly lubricated for when this goes back together and I send it back to Jack. So I clean up that base plate there using a cotton bud and meths. There is a lot of dirt on this. There's a few fibres and hairs wrapped around the brake block representations. This model has obviously seen some use on a layout in the past. Once everything's been removed, I use my dry paintbrush there just to remove the old fibres. And as I mentioned, here I am putting some fresh grease using a cocktail stick on the drivetrain. So you don't need much lubrication there. That grease will spread nicely through. And then just a tiny amount of oil. This oil applicator lets out a little bit more oil than I'd actually like. But I don't want to waste it, so I am using it up on these models as we go. And even after cleaning, I'm still finding lumps of fluff on this base keeper plate here. So now that I'm convinced that's thoroughly cleaned, I'm going to clip this back into place very gently, making sure those brake blocks line up with the wheels. And now that's all done, I'm just going to remove that decoder wire there. I will just give that a quick brush and then test all the wheels, and you can see there the wheels on that bogie are spinning nicely, which means now that all the wheels on this side at least are picking up as they should, and everything's been repaired and all the grime has been removed. So now I'll work on the other bogie, and I'll just speed the footage up of me doing that, as I did both bogies are exactly the same. Disassembly is the same and servicing them is the same. It was surprising how much dirt and grease did actually come off this model. It looked relatively clean on the outside, but in here the grime and that had really built up over time. And there was quite a few fibres as well. I'm not sure if this had been run on a carpet at some time. But that's all the pickups adjusted and all the wheels cleaned, and now I'm happy to say that the model's now running from all of its wheels. Every single one was checked, and you can see there with the battery they're all turning nicely. And now I can put the bogie frames back on the correct way. The cab footsteps there face towards the buffer beam on each end of the model. And once they're in the correct way, that will allow the bogie to pivot as it should. I'm not sure who put the ones on backwards, but as you could see, they were overhanging and stopping the bogie pivoting. Now the DCC decoder in this model wouldn't work on DC as we saw, so that'll be our next thing to see if we can remedy that or indeed fit a new decoder to it. So bogie side frames they're just a push friction fit into those lugs, and it does hold them in place rather well. Again, same method on Hornby's 31, 50 and Class 60. This sandbox had come loose in the box, so that just pushes in there using the two prongs that are on the plastic moulding. I did add a tiny amount of super glue on that just to hold it in place. I did that off camera though, because once I put this back down on the desk it fell off again. So the next thing we're going to tackle is the buffers. Now the buffers have obviously been damaged in the past. They are uneven and they are loose, and some of them are even pointing in the wrong direction. This buffer's been replaced with a Helgen Class 47 example. I know that because it's been cut off a sprue, and the sprue mark is still on there. This is one of the original Hornby sprung buffers, although it is locked solid, so I'd imagine it's been glued. So we're going to remedy these buffers and try and improve the appearance of this Class 56. So this one's put back into place, that's a friction fit. The 47 buffer, this was cut and trimmed and the burrs were removed, and that was put in place with a small amount of super glue again. And that is the buffers level and true, and now we're going to do the same for the other side. Now one of these is stuck pushed in, one is stuck out, and neither are sprung. So all four buffers on this model needed attention. I did just remedy the buffers that were on it, because buying a spare set off eBay would have increased the cost of this repair by about 15 to 20 quid, which is a lot of money just for a set of sprung buffers. So once the buffers were all done, these were pushed in place. They're a friction fit. They only go in one way. The hole is a certain shape to allow the buffer shanks to be pushed in. And then this loose buffer, the last one I'm going to do, this was, it looked like it had been glued in place with PVA glue in the past because it got some sort of sticky residue all over it. But this was rebuilt, the buffer shanks were rebuilt with some super glue. Very sparingly, you don't need a lot at all. I didn't want to overdo it. And then the buffer itself was pushed in, and this again was secured with a small amount of super glue. So that's all four buffers now back in place and sitting true as they should be. And now we're going to turn our attention to the body shell. Now I need to remove this cab insert to replace that window screen that's fallen out, and this is a clip fit thing. You have to be careful removing this, as you do not want to break those light lenses. But just look at the amount of detail on that cab control desk there with the dials and control levers. That's very nicely detailed. It'll be interesting to compare this to the Cavalex one when it comes out. Now the 56 is up on the rolling saddles. I'm just testing the light connections there to make sure that the lights work, which they do. So I'll have to adjust those spring contacts when we put the body shell back on to make sure that when the model is running, the lights are working on the model. The window screen was pushed back into place, and this was secured with a very small amount of plastic magic cement. This reacts very aggressively to plastic and will glue things very solid. It works by capillary action, and you only need a very tiny amount on the edge of the windscreen there, and it will soak itself around the window without getting onto the actual glazing and secure it into place. Once that's been done, the cab detail part was re-clipped onto the inside of the model, and then, like I said, these springs were adjusted. They were bent down slightly to make good contact with that brass pads on the chassis. Now if this was my model, I'd have probably soldered a piece of wire on those to give good electrical conductivity. But now I've adjusted the springs, you can see that the lights are working on that 56, and we're getting to the end of the rebuild now. We've got the couplings to sort out. One thing I did do, which was a bit premature, was put the bogie side frames on. What I should have done was left those on until I'd put the securing screws back in. Now these KD couplers, these have been mounted on a homemade plasticard base. So I'm going to glue these back into place with some super glue. This one came off this end as the paint that was missing off the chassis matched the paint that was stuck to the plasticard. So I'm going to have to guess and think that the person who owned this before Jack bought it lined his KD couplers up correctly, as I don't use KDs, so I'm just gluing them back into place. I did find a small screw that was used to secure the KD coupling on the other end that had broken away from its housing, and its housing had broke, so I drilled a 0.5mm hole in the plasticard and just screwed this into place. I didn't screw it up too tight, I left a bit of slack in it so that the KD can swing from side to side. Once that was done, the white plasticard was then touched in with some black paint so that you can't really see it from viewing angles anyway, but the glaringly white plasticard was a bit off-putting when working on the model, so just some rail match acrylic black was applied straight onto that plasticard just to disguise the mountings on the model. So just working slowly with a small brush, I'll just paint that plasticard in. And now it's on a track test. This is running on DC. You can see there that the lights are now working. It is a shame I couldn't find any multiple working receptacles for the ends of the model or any buffer beam cowls, but it does look a smart looking model as it stands. It'll be interesting to compare the Cavalex version of the 56 to this Hornby one when Cavalex release their model within the next 6 months. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com and we'll have a look again. It's sent over and it may even feature on an episode all of its own. The decoder on this 56 was reprogrammed at Trains for You. They did it there for me, and it seemed to unblock it and I was able to program it and get the 56 running, and you can see it here running around my layout hauling my train of ARC hoppers, which are the only stock I've got that are fitted with Buckeye couplings. Thanks again for watching Trash to Track. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you again in the next one. Bye for now.